Healthy leadership standards in spiritual communities are a matter of public interest. My goal is to spark constructive reform and protect current and future members of O.T.O. Everything in this video is my opinion, based on firsthand observations, public statements, and written records I possess. When we talk about harm in spiritual organizations, we're usually thinking of dramatic stories. The meltdowns, the public humiliation, the predators exposed. If you've seen The Vow or Going Clear, that's the image. Charismatic leaders, overt abuse. But that's only part of the picture, because even high control groups can't survive on chaos alone. They need something else, something quieter. They need reasonable people, the calm voices who step in to say, "It's just a misunderstanding. You seem a little triggered. Let's wait until you feel safe enough to talk about this." And in doing so, they don't stop the harm. They normalize it. They protect it. And they gaslight the people trying to name it. My name is James. I spent over a decade inside O.T.O, a thalamic organization I once believed deeply in. I held leadership roles. I tried to reform it from within. I spoke up, naming harm so that we could prevent it, so that we could create a space that was safe, transformative, and real. And again, I ran into the same pattern. Not overt abusers, but people who sounded reasonable, who used the language of growth, emotional intelligence, and process. But their real function was to protect power. They weren't the ones giving other members concussions. They were the ones soothing the members with the concussions. And they were more dangerous because they made abuse seem ambiguous, because they made accountability seem aggressive, and they made you feel like the problem. Let's break it down. Pattern 1, emotional reframing. This is when ethical violations, like verbal abuse or power tripping, get reframed as mutual misunderstandings or emotional misattunements. Instead of addressing behavior, the focus shifts to feelings, style, or communication. Imagine a senior member lashes out at you during a meeting, so you report it, and the response is, "You two just need to talk it out. Maybe you're taking it too personally." Let's focus on how we're both contributing to this. The reason this is gaslighting is because it denies the core issue, abuse of power, and replaces it with a false equivalence. You're no longer a person who is mistreated. You're now one half of a dynamic. It makes harm seem like a vibe mismatch rather than a boundary violation. It pressures you to perform emotional softness to stay in the group's good graces. You start wondering if you're overreacting. Instead of receiving support, you're asked to help process the feelings of the person who harmed you. Over time, abuse becomes harder to name. Tone becomes more important than truth. And the person willing to speak up gets treated as the real disruption. Another version you see of this is where members suggest that you just don't know how to talk to people. This is when systemic failure, like boundary violations, unethical promotions, and institutional gaslighting, is reframed as your failure to communicate properly. Instead of responding to what you're saying, people focus instead on how you're saying it. Imagine you raise legitimate concern about harm or abuse. Someone says, "I've disagreed with leadership and gotten results. You just have to know how to talk to people." This is like the O.T.O equivalent of your dad telling you to drop off your resume in person and give the vice president a firm handshake while looking him in the eye. It's gaslighting. It replaces the substance of your concern with a tone problem. It turns moral clarity into a PR problem, implying the issue wasn't what you said, it was that you weren't nice enough while saying it. And usually the people saying things like this haven't really challenged abuse. They've just done minor reforms. Holding power accountable is not equivalent with coming up with a new form or process. It's not morally equivalent, and it doesn't carry the same consequences inside O.T.O. Gaslighting like this erodes your confidence, and it forces you to choose between honesty and acceptability. You're left thinking that the only way to communicate your truth is to soften it or dilute it until it no longer threatens anyone. This gaslighting protects the hierarchy. It punishes directness and it rewards submission. It creates the illusion of reform while protecting the status quo, because only non-threatening feedback is allowed to reach the top. Pattern number 2, policy as pretext. This is when leaders stretch, reinterpret, or selectively enforce rules to serve personal or political agendas, while pretending they're just following procedure. It creates the illusion of fairness, even as power is being wielded arbitrarily. The form is bureaucratic, but the effect is psychological. It makes dissent look like a violation, and overreach look like duty. Imagine a situation where an OTO leader is exercising authority outside the scope of their role. This could be a former local body master trying to override the current one. It could be a 6th or 7th degree trying to pressure you about a social media post you made. It could even be someone trying to call shots in your non-OTO business or personal relationships. When you speak out against this overreach, you're told, "We're working to clarify that policy. It wasn't technically an order. They weren't interfering. They were just reaching out as a concerned brother or sister." The reason this is gaslighting is because it denies the reality of the power dynamic while subtly reinforcing it. The person overstepping their role is exercising authority, but the system pretends that it's just a misunderstanding, or worse, care. It makes you doubt your own clarity. It makes you wonder if you're the one who's overreacting, if you're being petty, if you misunderstood the lines of authority, when in fact, your boundaries were violated. This form of gaslighting allows power to operate without accountability. Rules are used selectively to reward insiders and punish critics. Over time, it creates a culture where nothing is enforceable except silence. Pattern 3. Displaced accountability. This is when the person who was harmed is made responsible for managing the feelings of the person who harmed them. Accountability doesn't flow upstream. It gets redirected sideways or back at you. Imagine a peer officer undermines you repeatedly. You address it directly and set a clear boundary. Then you're told, "You just need to make her feel safe again. He's just feeling misunderstood. Maybe reach out? We really don't need the drama." The reason this is gaslighting is because your boundary is recast as aggression. Your clarity is reframed as the problem. You're no longer the person setting a limit. You are the person who is creating tension. And suddenly, you're the one expected to fix it. This behavior punishes you for being clear. You're expected to prioritize the emotional comfort of the person who crossed your line. And if you don't, you're framed as cold, difficult, or unspiritual. Over time, boundaries become taboo. Clarity becomes conflict. And emotional coercion becomes the culture, where the burden of repair always falls on the shoulders of the person speaking the truth. Pattern 4. Gaslighting by omission. This is when someone in authority privately agrees with your concerns, but publicly does nothing. They validate you in secret, then disappear when it counts. Imagine you report months of manipulative behavior by an upper degree member. You go to someone in power, a local body master, an SGIG, someone in a governing body, and they say, "Those are valid concerns. Don't worry, I believe you. Oh, I know what they're like, believe me." And then they do nothing. Or worse, they promote the person you reported. This is gaslighting because you're told in private that your perception is correct, but then publicly it's denied. The silence creates cognitive dissonance. If the harm is real, why is the harm doer being rewarded? You start to wonder if you imagined it. Over time, it creates false hope. It isolates you further. And when leadership fails to act, you look like the one who's out of step, like you're overreacting to something that no one else seems to care about. This form of gaslighting allows those in power to appear compassionate while preserving the status quo. Reform becomes performative, and silence becomes the only strategy for those who see the truth. Pattern 5. Authoritative pathologizing. This is when people frame moral clarity or dissent as evidence of ego, trauma, or mental instability. Imagine you speak up about abuse or lack of accountability. Soon after, you're described as in crisis, emotionally unwell, talking to AI too much. People tell you things like, "You're just processing some deep stuff right now. This sounds like it could be spiritual psychosis. Is that your trauma talking? You know, I took a workshop on trauma once. I think this could be a 4F response." The reason this is gaslighting is because it reframes legitimate concerns as personal dysfunction. Instead of addressing what you're saying, people question why you're saying it, implying your clarity is delusion or unresolved trauma. It delegitimizes your conscience. You start to question your own sanity. You wonder if speaking up was a mistake. You may isolate, withdraw, or even try to apologize. Not because you were wrong, but because your pain was pathologized. Over time, it teaches members that the worst thing that they can do is to feel strongly or to speak clearly. It turns emotional intelligence into a liability. And it keeps the group stable by delegitimizing anyone who tells the truth. Pattern 6. Weaponized benevolence. This is masking control and intrusion in the language of care or mentorship. Imagine that you set a necessary boundary, either to protect the community or to protect your own time and emotional energy. An upper degree member then reaches out to check in. I'm not trying to challenge what you did. You have a right to your boundaries. I'd really like for this to be a learning moment for everyone. Let's make sure everyone is involved in the process. I'm just trying to help us all grow. The reason this is gaslighting is because it disguises coercion as care. When someone uses soft, supportive language to override your autonomy or reframe your boundaries as teachable moments, it makes it hard to tell whether you're being supported or subtly disciplined. The result is that you second guess your clarity. You start feeling guilty for protecting your time or saying no. You may even feel obligated to open yourself up emotionally, not because it's safe, but because it's framed as spiritual growth. You're no longer the victim, but the ungrateful student. Over time, this allows hierarchy to maintain control without appearing authoritarian. Emotional manipulation gets recast as mentorship. Members learn that the price of being seen as open-hearted is the erosion of boundaries. Pattern 7, punitive reframing of critique. This is when disagreement is equated with disrespect, even betrayal. Imagine you openly disagree with someone with power in a way which is thoughtful and respectful. And then you're told, I support your right to disagree, but your tone was really unfraternal. Freedom of thought is good, but you may want to review the third degree of, I don't think you're promoting beauty and harmony. The reason it's gaslighting is because it pretends to support dissent, while punishing it in subtle, moralizing terms. Instead of responding to the substance of your disagreement, it shifts the focus to your tone, your attitude, or your alignment with lofty values, implying that disagreement itself is a character flaw. You end up feeling like you have to choose between honesty and belonging. Even when you're careful and respectful, you're still made to feel like you've done something wrong. So you learn to self-censor, not because you were unkind, but because truth itself is treated as aggression. Over time, it creates a culture where conformity is rewarded and critical thought is pathologized. The appearance of harmony becomes more important than integrity. People are trained to mistake politeness for unity. Meanwhile, real issues go unaddressed. These patterns aren't quirks. They're not misunderstandings. They're not one-off mistakes. They're systemic strategies, absorbed, repeated, enforced. Whether consciously wielded or unconsciously internalized, they serve the same purpose: to protect power from accountability. Not through overt abuse, but from reasonable people offering explanations. Through people who say the right things while doing the wrong ones. Through people who prize image over integrity and compliance over conscience. This is why reform from within is impossible. Because it's not a glitch in the system, it is the system. OTO is a top-down, autocratic structure. Power answers only to itself. And the very mechanisms that claim to provide oversight are built to shield those already in charge. If you've ever been made to feel crazy for setting a boundary, if you've been cast as the problem because you set one, if you've watched good faith leadership be mocked, undermined, or erased, let me say this clearly. You're not crazy, you're not the problem, and you're not alone. Learn to spot these patterns. Trust your clarity. And never apologize for protecting your integrity. Because in a system like this, the truth is always a threat. Be that threat.